imagine? Can you imagine when the long fingers of dawn began to stretch themselves over the vast expanse of that Egyptian desert, and the light touched the top of the Sphinx's head and the top of the pyramids, that suddenly Joshua climbed up on the feet of that Sphinx, and he lifted that ram's horn to his lips, and he blew a peal, a sound of thunder that Egypt has never recovered from till this very day in time. And when the gates of Egypt swung open wide, and those Hebrew children came pouring through those gates on their way to the promised land, there are no words, there are no adjectives, there are no adverbs to tell you the excitement and the joy of the people as they began to leave the land of bondage. And they rejoiced on the way, and the Spirit of God covered them by day and by night. And I can imagine that the first night when they stopped to camp, they built their campfires, and they gathered around, and they slew their animals, and they roasted the flesh, and they began to count the jewels and the gold. And children asked their daddies, they said, "Daddy, is this what freedom is? Is this what freedom is?" And Daddy said, "This is what freedom is." And guess what? We don't have to get up in the morning. We can sleep in. We don't have to arise at the crack of a taskmaster's whip. And they danced, and they shouted, and they danced in circles, and the desert floor vibrated with the sound of dancing feet, and the air echoed and vibrated with the voices of the singing of the free, of the redeemed, rescued. Freedom. Say, I'm free. I'm free. And I'm never going back. I got out of Egypt, and I'm never going back. I'm never going back. Never. And they traveled like that. They traveled like that. Day after day, rejoicing, roasting, eating, dancing, making up songs, poetry, counting their wealth, by faith, traveling toward a land of promise that they had never seen. And they rejoiced day after day until they came to the shores of the Red Sea. And they camped against the shores of the Red Sea. And as they were in their joyful activities and counting their freedom, Moses and Joshua were in an encampment in a high place. And suddenly Moses said to Joshua, he said, "Joshua, I hear the sound of thunder." And Joshua listened, and suddenly he dropped to his knees and pulled the dagger from its sheath and stabbed it in the ground and hooked his teeth on the handle of the dagger, and he could feel the vibrations in the earth. And Joshua rose. He said, "No, Moses, it is not thunder. It's the sound of horses' hooves and the pounding of chariot wheels. The Egyptians are in hot pursuit." And the news spread through the camp, and fear came through the camp, and the people began to cry out. But Moses stretched forth the rod of the Lord. And when he did, the east wind began to blow. And it blew all night long, and God blew a highway through that Red Sea. And when the morning light came, those Hebrew children began to pour down in to that highway. I mean, imagine this. I mean, God is something. I mean, think about God. Think about God. He is something. I mean, imagine going through a highway of deliverance like walking through a vast aquarium. They could watch all the fish and the scenery. They could see the seaweed and all the coral. No snorkel gear. Just march in the name of the Lord. And they marched and they sang, and the water stood congealed in great gigantic walls on either side. And the Hebrew children marched through, and a pillar of fire separated Pharaoh and his armies from the escaping Hebrew children. But Pharaoh made the greatest military mistake of his entire career when he commanded his chariots and charioteers to follow the children of Yahweh into the midst of the sea. It was the greatest mistake of his entire military career. But when the last child was safe, the last donkey pulled to safety, the last wagon pushed and pulled up out of the sea, Moses stretched forth the rod of the Lord, and the towering walls of water, like mountains of liquid death, crashed down, covering the mighty army of Pharaoh. And years later they sang, the horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. Pharaoh could follow the Hebrew children to the water, but he could not get through the water because he didn't believe in the water. The Hebrew children did. Here is revelation, here is understanding. It was the water that separated Israel from Egypt. Water separated Israel from Egypt. When you came to God, you may be seated. When you came to God, when you started your journey, the devil followed you, trying to take you back. He followed me. He kept saying, this is not true. Don't get involved with these crazy people. Don't do this. You don't have to live like this. You don't have to act like that. Don't get involved with all that. Why waste your life with a bunch of people like this? Every day, every day, every day. I tell you, he followed me, and every day, every night, he told me, this is not really real. This is not really real. But I could feel something. I could feel something drawing me. Something drawing me. Something pulling at me. I could hear a voice. I could see a light. The devil can follow you to the edge of the baptistry. He can follow you to the very edge of the baptistry. He can scream at the top of his lungs. But he cannot get through the water. He cannot get through the water. When you come out of the water, you have left him on the other side. Why don't you act like it? Why don't you act like it? He's on the other side. He cannot get through the water. I've been delivered. I'm in the covenant. I've been redeemed. If you've been baptized in Jesus' name by immersion, you've already been delivered from this world. The devil can cry, he can scream, he can tremble, but you've left him behind. He cannot get through the water. Let me seated. Let me seated. I did a 2-year research on this circumcision business. A whole 2 years I studied back and forth. Last year when I finished typing up this message, I sat down in my home one day and I said, devil, come and get me. But you'll have to come through the water, and you can't get